It hurts when your family treats you like a burden, and not like the person who's always been there for them. Listen to my story, subscribe to the channel, and share it with women who should never have to go through this alone. I heard my brother say, "Why is she still alive? She's useless now." And then he and his wife laughed. My own brother, the one I raised as if he were my son. My name is Mabel Thompson. I'm 62 years old, and my body carries the marks of a lifetime spent serving others. My hair has turned gray, and no matter how I try to pin it back, there's always a stubborn strand falling across my face. My hands aren't pretty, scarred by hot pans, sewing needles, dish soap used without gloves, but every mark tells a story. I was never wealthy, but I learned to stretch little into much. A simple table always felt full when love sat around it. I spent decades believing it was my duty to give, and that receiving wasn't so important. Only now do I see that the love of family, the one thing I thought was guaranteed, can vanish without warning, and the pain of being invisible in your own home. I learned too late that this is the loneliest feeling of all. It was Sunday. The sunlight came through the dining room window and spread across the white tablecloth, but it wasn't the gentle kind of light that warms like an embrace. It was harsh, angled, exposing every hidden stain: the wine spilled in the corner, the grease on the glass cabinet, the dust on the fake flowers. The house was crowded, loud voices, laughter that snapped more than it rang with joy. The smell of roasted meat drifted from the kitchen, heavy, mixed with the bitterness of garlic burned in the pan. Oil still sizzled as I walked in carrying the tray of potatoes. It was still steaming. The vapor rose and fogged my glasses. I held it tight with a dish towel folded 4 times. The heat pressed into my palm, but I didn't let go. I never let go. I walked in. No one stood up. No one reached out to help. My brother leaned against the counter, pretending not to see me. He swirled his beer glass, as if the foam gave him something important to do. His wife arranged forks, straightened glasses, turned her head away, as if I were just a shadow moving through the room. I set the tray in the center of the table. The sound of glass hitting wood was louder than anything spoken in that room. A few glanced over, quickly, like the dish had placed itself there. I sat at the end. The chair creaked under me. I rested my arms on the table, waiting. For what? Maybe a smile, maybe a thank you, maybe nothing. And that's when I heard it. "Why is she still alive? She's useless now." The words weren't loud, but clear enough. And then came the muffled laugh. Sharp, cutting like a knife, just grazing the skin. He went on, "When she's finally gone, I'll get all the money in the account." My whole body froze. I didn't need to look. I knew exactly where it came from. The man leaning on the counter, the boy I once carried in my arms, my brother. My brother said it, and his wife laughed. The scrape of a knife on the cutting board pulled me back to another kitchen, decades ago. I was 17. Our mother worked herself to the bone, double shifts just to keep the lights on. He was my responsibility. I remember one day in particular. He fell in the yard, scraped his knee. He cried without stopping, face red, nose running. I sat with him on the porch step. I washed the cut with cold water from the hose. I blew on it until the pain eased a little. "You'll never be alone," I promised, and he believed me. He held my hand until he fell asleep in my lap. That memory had lived in me like a scar. But that Sunday, when I heard him call me useless, it felt as if that scar ripped open again, bleeding just like his knee had all those years ago. Only this time, there was no one to blow the pain away. Plates filled around me, forks clinked against glass, chairs scraped the floor, voices overlapped in conversations where my name never appeared. My brother raised his glass. "To family." The voices rose together, vibrant. "To family." I raised my arm too, but no one noticed. My toast died in the air, invisible like me. The metallic taste of silence burned worse than cheap wine. I remembered so many sleepless nights. When he was sick with fever, I stayed up, pressing cool towels to his forehead. When his ear ached, I rocked him, sang to him. When he needed a new uniform, my cashier's paycheck covered it. And when he wanted to study out of state, I sold my gold ring to help pay tuition. Piece by piece, I gave myself to him. And now, all he gave back was one sentence: "Why is she still alive? She's useless now." I looked back at the tray of potatoes. The steam was gone, the smell faded, lost in the stronger aromas. No one had complimented them. No one had served themselves. It was just a dish on the table. I was just another weight in that room. With every laugh that didn't include me, I shrank. With every glass raised without meeting my eyes, I disappeared. I was there, but it was as if I wasn't. I remembered another day, years earlier, my birthday. I spent the whole morning waiting for a call. The afternoon to late at night, I finally received a short message from him. Happy birthday. No commas, no dots, no warmth. 2 words, 2 crumbs, and I still held on to them like a feast. I picked up the fork, put a piece of potato on my plate, but the flavor never came. No seasoning could mask the taste of being forgotten. I swallowed hard. The lump stayed heavy in my throat. I drank some water. Even that wouldn't go down. I looked at my brother. I looked at his wife. They laughed, as if I didn't exist. I wanted to ask, why? Why so much contempt? Why so much indifference? But the words never left my mouth. They stayed locked inside, like so many things I swallowed through the years. That was the moment I realized, the questions you never ask turn into wounds that never heal. I pushed the plate away, folded my hands in my lap, stared into the empty space. And one question hammered inside me. If I don't matter here anymore, where do I still matter? The answer didn't come that Sunday, but the question never left. And questions, when left unanswered, sooner or later become decisions. After that Sunday, I came home carrying more than just an empty dish. I carried the weight of no longer belonging in the life of the person I had helped raise. The door creaked as I closed it behind me. The sound echoed through the living room, bounced off the bare walls, traveled down the hallway, and died in the kitchen. The house seemed to stare back at me, still, as if waiting for me to say something, but there was nothing left to say. I set my purse on the chair, and placed the still warm dish in the sink. The steam had already vanished, but the smell of roasted potatoes clung to the dish towel. I washed my hands. Water ran across my fingers, and, for a moment, it felt like I wasn't washing away dirt. I was trying to rinse off an invisible mark. As I passed through the living room, I saw the picture frames lined neatly on the shelf, faces smiling at old celebrations. My little brother holding a toy car, my mother blowing out candles, me in a faded blue dress at some birthday party. The photos didn't speak, but they accused me in silence. You gave so much, and now you have nothing. I sat on the couch. The cushions sank under my weight. The clock on the wall read 7:32 p.m., but inside the house it already felt like midnight. That's when I realized silence weighs more than any cruel word. I remembered when this same house was alive with noise. Back in the 80s, the windows were always open. The smell of fresh bread drifted from the kitchen. The radio played songs I sang without knowing the lyrics. My brother would run down the hallway, slamming doors like they were drums. I complained, but secretly, I smiled. The walls held endless conversations, plans, dreams, even the usual sibling fights. It was life, pulsing in every corner. Now, only echoes remained. Silence is deceptive. At first it feels like peace, but then it turns into a ghost. It lies next to you in bed, takes the chair in the living room, sits at the table uninvited, and the more silence there is, the sharper you feel the emptiness of what no longer exists. I remembered one night when he was 12. It was pouring rain, and the power went out. We sat in the living room, lit only by candles. He was afraid, trembling. I held him close and said, "As long as I'm here, you'll never need to be afraid." And he believed me, looked at me with those wide eyes, and trusted me, as if I were his shield against everything, and I was. Until I wasn't anymore. I got up and walked through the house. Every room seemed to measure me. In the kitchen, the digital clock blinked 12 o'clock, frozen in time. In the bedroom, the bedspread was neatly stretched, but cold. In the bathroom, the mirror reflected my tired face, lined with marks that hadn't been there years before. I ran my hand across the glass, as if I could erase them. But they weren't on the mirror, they were on me. Another memory came, my mother's 50th birthday. I organized everything, invited neighbors, cooked food, filled the house with flowers. That day, my brother hugged me and said, "You're the best, Mabel. I don't know what I'd do without you." Now, sitting at the head of his own table, he seemed to have forgotten every word. I returned to the couch and stared at the ceiling. The light bulb flickered faintly, as if it too were exhausted. The clock on the wall dragged its minutes forward, but inside me, time had stopped. I asked myself, what happens to a woman when even her own family decides she's no longer of any use? There was no answer, only the distant hum of the refrigerator. But a certainty took root in that silence. If they wouldn't give me a place, I would have to find my own. And the silence, which once felt like a ghost, suddenly became fertile ground, because it was in that silence that the decision began to grow. The next morning, I woke up early. The light slipped through the thin curtain and stung my eyes. The house still smelled faintly of last night's coffee, mixed with the stubborn dampness that clung to the corners. I got up with a heavy body, as if every step carried not only my weight but the weight of the night before. I picked up the mail tossed on the table, an envelope from the bank, my name written in hard, cold letters. I opened it carefully, the way you open a wound. The numbers didn't add up. Withdrawals I hadn't made. Movements that weren't mine. I scanned it again, searching for some mistake. But there was none. It was my brother. The same boy who once cried in my arms was now using my name to drain the little I had. The paper trembled in my hands. So did I. I remembered the day we opened the joint account. He had insisted it would be easier that way. Mabel, in case of an emergency, I'll take care of it. You won't have to worry. And, as always, I trusted him. I signed the papers with steady hands. I thought I was securing our future. What I didn't see then was that I was handing him my keys. Trust is like giving someone a copy of your house. You hope they'll use it to help, but sometimes they use it to empty the drawers. There was also the loan. He once asked for money, saying it was just to pay his kid's school. I pulled from my savings the same money I'd been keeping aside to fix the roof. I'll pay you back, he promised. He never did, and I never asked. That day, I realized my silence came with a price, and it was far too high. I went to the bank that afternoon. The air was cold, the air conditioning blowing too hard. The polished floor reflected the hurried steps of other customers. I sat across from the teller, a young woman with a practiced smile. I handed her the statement. These withdrawals aren't mine, I explained. She looked at the screen, typed, confirmed. It's under the co-holder's name. He has full access. My stomach turned. The word full struck like a hammer. I had given my sweat, my safety, my future, to someone who now denied me even a seat at the table. And for the first time, I understood. Loving without limits can mean giving someone the power to erase you. I thought back to my first paycheck. I was 18. I bought a simple pair of shoes and tucked the rest into an envelope under my mattress. Back then, saving money meant saving hope. Now, it felt like that hope had been withdrawn, along with the numbers from my account. I walked out of the bank with firm steps, the folded statement tucked inside my purse. And with it, a certainty. I would close the joint account. No more papers in his name. No more keys handed over. As I walked down the street, the wind lifted my hair and I thought, if even my money can be taken, what else have I stopped owning? That question echoed inside me like a bell, and with every toll came a warning. The next decision could not wait. I couldn't keep letting this go. I had to act fast. I gathered my courage and decided to call him. I picked up the phone. It felt heavy in my hand. The buttons seemed to stiff, as if each number was a warning to give up. But I dialed. I waited for the rings. His voice came through, tired but steady. "Hello, it's me," I said. A brief, uneasy silence. "What happened?" I found the withdrawals from the account. On the other end, I held breath. "I needed the money, Mabel. You know how hard things are. Needed it." My voice came out calm, but sharp. "Without telling me, without asking." He hesitated. "It's our joint account. I have the right." "Right." I drew in a breath. "You had rights when I changed your diapers, when I paid for your schooling, when I sold my ring so you could go study away from home. That money wasn't your right." As I spoke, I remembered the envelope under my mattress, my first paycheck saved with such care. That money had represented hope. And now, decades later, that hope had been reduced to an unauthorized withdrawal. "You're always exaggerating, Mabel. It was just a little. I was going to put it back." "Put it back?" I cut him off. "Like you paid back the loan for your kid's school. Like you paid back the nights I sat at the edge of the bed, keeping watch while you burned with fever. Like you paid back the youth I spent raising you." On the other end, silence. And in that silence, I felt the words finally sink in. "You don't understand." He tried. "Oh, I do. I understand that I trusted you more than I trusted myself. And that was my mistake." In that call, I realized that sometimes the love we give becomes the excuse someone uses to take advantage of us. So that's it. You're turning your back on me." His voice rose, angry now. "No." I took a deep breath. "I'm turning forward. You're the one stuck behind, trapped in the time when I kept saving you." All I heard after that was his heavy breathing, then the dry click of the call ending. The screen went black. The silence of the phone weighed heavy in the room, and I thought, if he hung up, it was because he finally understood that, for the first time, there was no going back. The day I closed the joint account was like pulling out a thorn that had been buried for years. I sat across from the bank teller, a young woman who couldn't grasp the weight of what I was doing. To her, it was just paperwork. To me, it was freedom. I signed the forms with steady hands. While she typed into the computer, I thought of all the times that card had been swiped without my consent. I thought of the nights I skipped buying something for myself so he could have what he wanted. When the stamp hit the paper, it sounded like a bell marking the end of an era. I walked out of the bank lighter, as if I had left behind not just an account, but years of servitude disguised as brotherhood. It didn't take long for him to show up at my house, furious. He pounded on the gate, his face red, the veins in his neck bulging. "How could you?" he shouted, not even saying my name. "Now I don't have access anymore." I met his eyes through the bars. "I didn't open the gate, because you never should have had it," I answered. He slammed his fists against the metal, as if trying to break not just iron, but my decision. Inside, my heart raced, but I didn't give in. "You owe me this," he roared, and for the first time, I said out loud, "I don't owe anyone anything." The silence that followed was the loudest I had ever heard. He stepped back, shaken, and in that moment I realized the fear I had carried of him was left on the other side of the gate. And if he thought I was finished there, he had no idea what was coming next. That night, I sat at the table with a blank sheet of paper, and I realized that a simple pen can be heavier than any stone I have ever carried. The kitchen was silent. Only the ticking of the clock filled the space, striking each second like a hammer. I turned on the yellow light, casting shadows across the wooden table. I placed a sheet in front of me, picked up the pen. It was the same pen I had used countless times to sign my brother's report cards, permission slips for school trips, teacher notes. Now, that pen would write something that had no return. I took a deep breath. The chair creaked. So did my heart. I remembered the first time I signed in place of my mother. She was working double shifts, couldn't make it to the school meeting. The teacher handed me the report card and said, "It needs the guardian's signature." I was only 15, but I signed with steady hands. In that moment, I stopped being just a sister. I became a substitute mother. How many times did I repeat that gesture? How many times did a simple signature force me into adulthood too soon? The blank page in front of me seemed to stare back. I picked up the pen. I wrote slowly, like cutting into my own skin. "I declare that all my possessions, property, and belongings do not belong to any member of my family." The ink flowed firmly. Each word landed like a hammer blow against years of sacrifice. One day, when he was 9, he came home with a crumpled note. He had gotten into a fight at school. He begged me not to show our mother. I signed the note and handed it back to the teacher. "Thank you, Mabel," he said, hugging my waist. And in that moment I thought, one day, he'll protect me from the world the way I protect him now. But that day never came. Signing is a simple act, but it's also a surrender. And I realized I had spent my life signing papers that bound me, when what I needed was to write papers that freed me. Years ago, when I first felt invisible, I wrote a letter. It was to him. "I need you to see me. I need you to respect me." But I never sent it. I kept the letter in a drawer. It's still there, yellowed now, heavy with words I swallowed. This time, I wasn't going to keep it. I kept writing. I made it clear, nothing would go to them. Not one piece of furniture, not a single keepsake. Every belonging, every cent, would be given to someone who truly understood the value of dignity. I signed at the bottom, my full name, and for the first time, it felt like it truly belonged to me. I closed my eyes. The pen felt lighter, as if I had taken a stone off my chest. I left the paper folded in the top drawer, looked around the house, every wall painted with my sweat, every detail once dreamed of sharing with the family. And I thought, if this house won't be theirs, then whose will it be? The question throbbed inside me, and the answer, which came soon after, would change everything. I looked at the walls I had painted with my own hands and realized this house would not be the tomb of my story, but the cradle of many others. The afternoon fell slowly. Light filtered through the living room window, tinting the old curtains orange. Dust floated in the air, revealed by the low sun, as if each grain were a piece of memory I still wasn't ready to let go of. I ran my fingers along the hallway wall. The paint was peeling in spots, but it still carried the mark of my brushstrokes. I had painted every corner of this house myself. My hands ached at the time, but my heart smiled. Now, every crack seemed to ask me, who will inherit this? My feet carried me to the living room. I sat on the couch and stared at the shelf filled with photo albums, short trips, simple birthdays, moments lost between the cracks of time. And I thought, if my brother doesn't know the value of this house, then someone has to. I drifted back in time. It was 1981 when I signed the papers for the house. The realtor handed me the keys with a stiff smile. I was alone, but it didn't matter. The feeling was victory. The floor still smelled of fresh cement. The walls echoed footsteps like an empty church. That day, I promised myself, this will be the place where my family will always feel at home. And I kept that promise for decades. But now, remembering it, I saw that the promise had never really been for them. It was for me. I walked into the room that used to be for guests. The bed was made, but never slept in. In the closet, sheets were folded, untouched. There, the silence was even louder, and I imagined, what if other women could fill this space? Women who, like me, had felt the weight of rejection. My heart beat faster. I had once been in a place like that, years ago, when life pulled me down. I spent a few weeks in a women's shelter. I remember the smell of weak coffee in the mornings, the iron beds lined up, the shuffle of slippers in the hallway. It wasn't luxury, but it was dignity. There, no one looked at me like I was a burden. In that space, I learned that a roof can mean the difference between surviving and giving up. And now, I could give that roof to others. The house wasn't just brick and cement. It was symbol. It was shelter. It was voice. And I knew I didn't want it to turn into a bargaining chip, an inheritance forgotten in a lawyer's drawer. I wanted this house to be a home. I stepped into the yard. The tree I had planted was still there, small when I first bought the house. Now it stood tall, its crooked branches strong. How many times had my brother played under that tree? How many times had I promised him that yard would always be our place? Now, the tree stood as witness to what remained, a woman determined to change her fate. It was there, under the shadow of that tree, that the decision took shape. My house would become a shelter for elderly women abandoned by their families. It would be a place of welcome, an inheritance of dignity, not of ungrateful blood. A few days later, I walked into the lawyer's office. The air smelled of paper and stale coffee. I sat across from the heavy wooden desk. The lawyer adjusted his glasses, looked at me, and asked, "Are you certain, Mrs. Thompson?" "More than ever," I replied as he read the document aloud. Each word seemed to take on a body. "I leave my house as a shelter for elderly women abandoned by their families." I signed at the bottom. The black ink flowed firm, without tremor. In that moment, I felt I wasn't just protecting a property. I was giving meaning to everything I had lived, to every pain turned into decision. I left the office certain that, for the first time, the story of my life would not be written by others. It was mine, and it was signed. For the first time, I didn't fear the future. I felt purpose. It's not the present that hurts the most. It's when the past returns whole, as if it were today. Night fell heavy. I sat on the edge of the bed, the open window letting in the cold wind. The rustle of the backyard trees sounded like voices that would not quiet down. The lamp cast a dim glow, just enough to reveal the dust on the furniture and the stack of books on the nightstand. I closed my eyes. I thought silence might bring rest. But silence, when you're already wounded, only brings memories. And memories, sometimes, cut deeper than cruel words. I saw my mother again, her hair pulled back in a rush, her hands rough with calluses from endless work. She left before dawn, placed my little brother in my arms, and said, "Take care of him, Mabel, you're strong." I was still a teenager. I wanted to be with friends, to think about school, about dreams. But I stayed. I made bottles, washed clothes, soothed midnight cries. Back then, I thought I was being trained to become a woman. Now I know I was turned into a mother too soon. Carrying responsibilities that weren't mine gave me strength. But it also stole my lightness. And now, hearing that same brother say I was useless felt like spitting on the girl I once was. I remembered when my father left us. He walked out on an ordinary morning and never came back. The slam of the door etched itself into my memory like a tattoo made of sound. That day, I promised I would never abandon anyone who needed me. A promise I kept, but one never returned. I stood up and walked through the dark house. I touched the objects heavy with stories, the big pot from family parties, the worn living room rug, the faded kitchen curtain. Each one seemed to ask me, "Why are you still here, Mabel?" I sat again, this time on the couch. I pulled an album from the shelf. The pictures bore witness: birthdays, Christmases, gatherings. My face was always there, but always in the corners carrying dishes, watching children, serving. Never in the center, never the protagonist. I remembered the night my brother, already grown, said, "One day I'll take care of you, the way you took care of me," and I believed him. I held on to that promise like someone clutching a jewel. Today I see it was glass disguised as diamond. Broken promises echo louder in silence. And that house, which I had decided to turn into a shelter, seemed to whisper my own disappointments back to me. I lay down on the bed without taking off my shoes. I stared at the ceiling until my eyes burned. I thought of all the times I kept quiet not to hurt, gave not to lose, stayed not to leave emptiness behind. And I realized the emptiness was already here, with me, not because I had left, but because they had. I squeezed my eyes shut, and I made myself a promise. I would never again wait for them to recognize my worth. If there was someone willing to see me, it would be outside that house, outside that bloodline that felt more like a noose. The next morning, I didn't know yet who would cross my path, but I knew this: the next face that truly saw me could change everything. It was a simple good morning from the other side of the fence that changed the course of my loneliness. It was a Monday morning. I was in the yard, watering plants that had wilted in the heat, when I heard footsteps on the sidewalk. I looked up and saw a young woman carrying 2 grocery bags. The sun caught her loose brown hair, and she paused for a moment to adjust the weight in her arms. "Good morning," she said, with a faint smile. It was the first time in a long while that someone looked directly at me without hurry, without turning away. Her name was Clara. She was just over 20, living alone in the house next door, newly rented. I didn't know it yet, but that simple meeting would give my house once so silent a voice again. I remembered what it used to be like in the early years here. Streets full of children running, neighbors gathered at the fence in the evenings, conversations spilling across yards. Over time, they all left. Empty houses, closed doors, eyes that grew distant, and I too, closed up, like the windows of my house. Back then, I also carried in my eyes the weight of someone who wanted so much but had so little. Clara reminded me exactly of that lost version of myself. Now, seeing her there, smiling with arms heavy from the bags, felt like a piece of that lost life had been returned. I offered to help carry the groceries. She laughed, thanked me, and accepted. Together, we pushed open the iron gate, its creak echoing into the morning. Inside her house, the air still smelled of fresh paint mixed with opened boxes. A home just beginning. Later, back on my porch, I brewed coffee and, without planning, invited her to join me. The smell of freshly ground beans filled the kitchen. We sat, I listened as she spoke, and in every pause I saw a little of myself years ago. Clara told me she lived alone, from another city, with no family nearby. Her mother had passed away young. Her father had never been around. I smiled with sadness. I understood the language of absence. That day, Clara left with a genuine smile. "Can I come back another time?" she asked. I nodded, but inside, something stirred. I remembered when I first arrived alone on this very street, almost her age. I had little more than courage and a small suitcase. Worked during the day, studied at night, took care of my brother whenever I could. I was young, but already tired. Looking at Clara was like looking into that forgotten reflection, a mix of strength and fragility. I realized Clara wasn't just a neighbor, she was a mirror, and maybe also a chance to be for her the companion I once needed and never had. I recalled a night when I was 21, coming home exhausted, feet aching, my mother asleep on the couch, my little brother crying. I sat, held him in my arms, and promised myself that one day someone would take care of me too. A promise broken, but never erased. Now, looking at Clara, I felt that maybe I still had a chance to be cared for, even if in a different way, through friendship. In the days that followed, Clara began stopping by often. Sometimes she brought bread, sometimes only stories. We sat on the porch, listening to the distant barking of neighborhood dogs or the wind shaking the trees. We laughed together at little things. As she spoke, I noticed her gestures, restless hands tracing the edge of the cup, eyes that shifted away when the subject grew heavy. The body of someone carrying hidden pain, and I knew how to read those signs. I chose not to judge, just to listen. And she, maybe for the first time, found in me a place to rest. And the house, once echoing with loneliness, seemed at last to breathe. I remembered my childhood neighbor, Mrs. Ruth, who offered me cake whenever she saw I was sad. At the time, I thought it was just cake. Now I know it was care. Now, I was in her place offering coffee, offering listening, comfort, disguised as coffee. One afternoon, in one of our talks, Clara said, "Sometimes I feel like I have more in common with you than with people my own age." I stayed quiet, but smiled inside, and I thought, maybe life was giving me back the family that blood had denied me. Sometimes, the heart doesn't choose relatives. It chooses people who appear out of nowhere and yet feel like they've always been there. Clara showed up on a hot afternoon, clapping her hands at the gate the old-fashioned way of asking permission. She carried a dish covered with a floral kitchen towel. "I made cornbread cake. I'd like you to try it," she said, shyly smiling. The sweet smell escaped through the fabric. I led her into the kitchen. The oven was still warm, and the fragrance of the cake blended with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. We sat at the table. The afternoon light filtered through the thin curtain, gilding the room. Clara began to speak more than before. She told me about her demanding job, about studies cut short, about the weight of being alone in a new city. I listened, and every pause she left fit into silences that once had been mine. I remembered losing my first steady job. I worked at a fabric store. The boss dismissed me without warning, saying my niece needs the position. I rode the bus home, clutching my empty lunchbox. That day, I swore I would never let myself be discarded again. But oaths, sometimes, break slowly. Clara spoke with her hands, her eyes shining between unshed tears. But when she laughed at small things, like the neighbor's chicken that kept wandering into her yard, her laughter was light, almost childlike. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't in a long time, reflected joy. And I realized something precious. The kitchen, once echoing with silence, now carried the sound of life. I thought of Teresa, my best friend from youth. We did everything together, studied, laughed, dreamed. But when life pushed me into raising my brother, there was no more time for friendship. Years later, Teresa moved away. I never saw her again. Now, looking at Clara, I thought, maybe life was giving me a second chance. Blood may give us relatives, but it doesn't guarantee companionship. Friendship, though it can be born at any age, and sometimes it feels more like family than family itself. Clara began stopping by often, sometimes with fresh bread, sometimes only with a tired smile. I made coffee, she shared stories. We spoke of simple things, shows she watched, plants I struggled to keep alive, neighborhood news. But beneath every conversation, there was something greater, an invisible thread binding us. Often, I caught myself smiling effortlessly, the way I hadn't in years. I remembered when my brother was little, running to show me clumsy drawings, waiting for applause. Now it was Clara showing me her small victories, and I applauded with my whole heart. And I felt an old emptiness begin to heal. I realized I still had something to give, not as a substitute mother, not as a forced caregiver, but as a woman who knows how to listen. And that, I discovered, can be more valuable than any inheritance. One afternoon, during one of our talks, Clara looked at me and said, "You remind me of the mother I never had." I stayed quiet, but inside, a forgotten part of me stood up again, and I thought, is it possible to rebuild an entire family from an unlikely bond? I didn't know it then, but that bond would soon be tested. He didn't come back to see me. He came to demand from me. And he discovered too late that the version of me he once knew no longer existed. The doorbell rang on a stifling afternoon. The sound echoed through the house like an alarm. I opened the door, and there he was, my brother, wrinkled shirt, hard stare, shallow breath. Beside him, his wife, the same one who once laughed at my expense. "We need to talk," he said, without greetings. The air felt heavier than the summer heat. I invited them in. The living room. Once the stage of childhood laughter, now looked like a courtroom. "I heard about the will," he began, bluntly. "It's true," I answered. "You can't do this. This house." He paused, searching for words. "This house is part of the family too." I looked at him. "And since when have I been part of your family?" The silence that followed hurt more than shouting. He paced the room, like a caged animal. "You're being unfair, Mabel." "Unfair?" I asked. "Unfair was me spending my life taking care of you, and then hearing that I'm useless." He stopped. His wife turned her eyes away. "You always exaggerate," he muttered. "Exaggerate. I gave you my arms when no one else would. I gave you shelter, food, chances, and what did you give me?" My voice was steady, not raised. "A knife, not thunder. You'll regret this," he said. Louder now. I folded my arms. "I've already spent a lifetime regretting putting you above myself. That regret I don't carry anymore." His face went pale. His wife tried to intervene, but her silence was as good as complicity. I remembered the first time I wanted to say no. It was for a small favor, and I didn't have the courage. Today, finally, I said it, and every letter of that no weighed like freedom. The conversation ended abruptly. He stormed out, slamming the door, throwing threats of lawyers and trouble. I stayed alone in the living room. The house still shook from the noise of the door. But inside me, there was calm. I pulled the will from the drawer, ran my hand across the signed paper. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of losing anything because I had already regained myself. I understood then, blood family can turn into strangers, and strangers can turn into family. My brother lost me not on paper, but in my heart. That night, Clara knocked on the door. She brought fresh bread and asked if I was all right. I nodded, but I smiled in a new way. For the first time, I was certain I wasn't alone, and as her voice filled the kitchen, I thought, if I lost my brother, had I gained something greater? The answer would come soon, in the farewell to the house that had held everything. It's not easy to say goodbye to walls that have held your life. But some doors must be closed so other windows can open. It was a Saturday morning. The sun slipped through the blinds, drawing golden stripes across the room. The air was still, as if even the house were holding its breath. I walked slowly, noticing every detail. The shelf stained with rings from glasses, the worn-out sofa in the right corner, the table scratched from family gatherings. Every object seemed to say farewell in silence. I picked up a damp cloth and wiped the furniture. The smell of wet wood rose, mixed with dust. I felt like crying, but I didn't. The tears, I realized, had already been spent in years of silence. Now was a time to let go, not to mourn. Memory pulled me back. The first Christmas in the house. I was still young, with no money for a real tree. I put together one with dry branches, decorated with colored paper. My brother ran around it, enchanted. "One day we'll have a big tree," he said, and I believed him. Now, looking at the empty corner where the tree once stood, I understood. The ornaments were gone, but the spirit of perseverance remained. I began packing. Cardboard boxes open, tape ripping the air, newspaper cradling old dishes. Each wrapping was more than porcelain, it was memory preserved. When I sealed the first box, it felt like closing a chapter of my life. I stepped into the yard. The tree was still there, tall and steady. I sat on the concrete bench and closed my eyes. I remembered children running, improvised barbecues, conversations that stretched into the night. The tree had witnessed both joy and sorrow. I touched its rough bark. "Now you'll take care of other women," I whispered. I discovered that a house is more than a roof. It's a mirror. And sometimes, we need to break the mirror so we don't stay trapped in the reflection of what no longer exists. I sat on the couch one last time. The boxers were ready, stacked in the corner. The silence was deepened in. The phone shattered it. I looked at the screen. His name, insistent rings. 1, 2, 3. The sound echoed through the nearly empty room, like a ghost asking to come in. I didn't answer. I let the ringing fill the house for a moment, and when it stopped, I felt a strange relief, as if silence had finally won a battle. I remembered all the times I had rushed to answer. When he called in the middle of the night asking for help. When he needed money. When he wanted someone to listen to his problems. I always answered. I always said yes. Now, each call ignored was a no I owed to myself. The phone rang again. 5 times, 6 times, 7. Each unanswered call tore away another invisible thread that still bound me. I recalled the last time the house had been full. It was my brother's birthday. I cooked all day. He raised a toast. Everyone laughed, but no one spoke my name. I was there, but invisible. That day, the house had already begun to say goodbye to me. In that moment, I realized it wasn't just a farewell to the house. It was a farewell to a lifetime of emotional dependence. I went to the window. Outside, the yard breathed silence. The trees swayed gently, indifferent to the ringing phone. And I thought, if even nature can stay firm against the wind, why couldn't I? And the next sound I would hear would not be a phone. It would be the sea. It wasn't just a change of address. It was a change of life. I wasn't carrying boxes. I was carrying choices. The moving truck stopped out front. The rumble of the engine pounded in my chest like a drum. The men began lifting the boxes I had packed. Each one felt lighter than the memory it contained. As I watched, a chill ran through me. It wasn't fear, it was something new. The feeling of crossing a bridge without looking back. Before leaving, I made one last gesture. I lit a small candle in the center of the table and stared at the flame. The fire lit up the marks of time on the wood, the scars of the house. I closed my eyes and gave silent thanks for everything I had lived, for everything I had learned. Then I blew out the candle. It was the end of a cycle. I realized that saying goodbye isn't losing. It's recognizing that a place has fulfilled its purpose and now must serve others. I closed the door with the key, left it inside the envelope already addressed to the shelter. The wood made a deep, solemn sound as it shut. I climbed into the car with Clara, who insisted on coming along for the trip. The road stretched out ahead of us, long and straight. The sky was clear, with lazy clouds scattered like cotton. The wind rushed through the open window, carrying the smell of damp earth and freedom. I remembered the first time I ever truly traveled. I was 19. I took a bus to visit a distant aunt. It was the first time I'd left town. My heart raced not because of the destination, but because there was a world beyond the streets I knew. Now, so many years later, I felt that same rush. Clara chatted excitedly, trying to distract me. She talked about work, about her plans to go back to school. I smiled, but part of me was quiet, speaking only with memories. I looked out the window. The sea appeared first as a faint blue line, then as an endless expanse. The salty scent reached me before the full view did, and in that instant I knew I had made the right choice. I remembered how, as a child, I told my mother I wanted to live by the sea. She laughed and said, "The sea is for those who can afford it, Mabel. We belong inland." I never argued. I kept the dream to myself. Now, decades later, that silence was finally broken. The car stopped in front of the little house, white, with faded paint, blue shutters chipped by time, simple, but with a porch facing the horizon. When I opened the door, I smelled old wood mixed with sea air. It wasn't luxury, but it was freedom. I placed a box on the table and stood still, listening to the sound of the waves. It felt as if the ocean itself were welcoming me. I remembered a song I used to hear on the radio when I was young. It spoke of starting over, of leaving without fear. Back then, I sang it without believing. Now, every word rang true. I understood then, the change wasn't in the boxes, it was in me. I wasn't just leaving a house. I was leaving behind the guilt that had never been mine, leaving behind the wait for recognition that would never come, leaving behind the shadow. That night, Clara helped me unpack the first things. We hung light curtains, opened the windows. The sea breeze filled the room, shaking the fabric like banners of conquest. I brewed coffee. We sat on the porch. The sound of the waves was constant, like the calm breathing of someone asleep. I looked at Clara, then at the sea, and thought, this, at last, is my place. Before bed, I walked to the bedroom window. The moonlight reflected on the water, lighting the horizon. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Thank you." I didn't know exactly to whom I was speaking, life, God, or myself, but I was grateful. And I understood that the final chapter wasn't about loss, it was about peace. On the first night, I fell asleep to a sound that seemed to call my name. It was the ocean, and it whispered, "You are home." I woke up early. Soft light filtered through the thin curtains. The air carried the scent of salt mixed with the aroma of fresh coffee I had just brewed. I opened the door to the porch and let the wind wrap around me. The sound of the waves was steady crashing against the rocks, retreating, returning again, a rhythm that felt like a heartbeat. And for the first time in a long while, my own heart matched that rhythm without hurry. I walked barefoot on the sand. The coolness beneath my feet was unlike any ground I had ever stepped on. It wasn't hard like the cement of the old house. It wasn't rough like the cracked yard. It was soft, moldable, welcoming, and I thought, maybe I could be like this too, from now on. I remembered being 15, writing in a notebook, "One day I'll live by the sea." Today, with the breeze on my face, I realized that teenage secret had become my destiny. The days filled with simple routines, tidying the house, cooking, talking with Clara, who always came by to help. Evenings spent on the porch, coffee in hand, embraced by good silence, not the silence that weighs like absence, but the silence that rests like peace. I placed books on the shelves, hung light curtains, planted flowers in improvised pots. With each detail, I felt the house breathing with me. I remembered all the times I had waited for someone who never came back, waited for a call, a hug, recognition. Now, in contrast, I waited for nothing. And it was exactly in that emptiness of expectations that I found fullness. One hot Saturday morning, while I brewed coffee, I heard a car stopping in front of the house. I looked out the kitchen window and saw Clara step out, carrying 2 medium suitcases and a nervous smile. I left the kettle on the stove and ran to the porch. "Going on a trip?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. She shook her head. "No, I came to stay." The wind carried the smell of the ocean, and with it, a lump rose in my throat. Clara walked through the gate, and before I could say anything, she added, "This is where I feel at home." I hugged her, tightly, like holding a new life in my arms. In that moment, I realized the sea wasn't my only gift. It had brought me something greater. The family blood had denied me. Now, each morning, 2 cups waited on the porch table. And I, who had spent so long believing I was alone, discovered that life had saved a daughter from a knot of blood, but of choice. I learned that life can begin again at 20, at 40, or at 62. Age doesn't matter. What matters is the courage to close doors and open windows. And I, who had feared change so many times, discovered that change was the only way to remain whole. I understood that love should never be begged for. I discovered that dignity is not a noisy victory. It is steady silence. It is choosing your own road. It is trading the weight of invisibility for the lightness of existing in peace. And you? Have you ever lived through something like this in your family? Tell your story in the comments. Let's turn every wound into strength.